I'm here with Malcolm Hoenlein, the CEO of the Conference of Presidents of Major American Jewish Organizations. Malcolm, do you share the President's vision for a brighter tomorrow in terms of peace here in the region?
Absolutely. I think that the events that have happened, as devastating as they may be and confusing as they are, may present new opportunities. We see already the backlash against some of the extremist tendencies that we saw immediately after this period of turmoil began. So I think that there will be possibilities. I hear it in talking with Arab leaders. I think that Israel's prospects are great, and that people have come to appreciate the importance of Israel in the region. And Arab leaders express it in ways that we had not heard before. So I think that there could be a brighter tomorrow.
You sat on a panel that dealt with the U.S.-Israel relationship. How do you grade that relationship as of now?
Very strong. We have record numbers of support amongst the American people for Israel. We should not take it for granted. We do have the delegitimization movement, we have the BDS, we have all of those things. But overall, the American people and elected officials on both sides of the aisle support Israel, support the U.S.-Israel relations in many areas, intelligence, military, the R&D, the day-to-day interchange that people don't read about and don't hear about because good news doesn't make news, is really very strong. So I think that the U.S.-Israel relationship is healthy. There are challenges. We have to continue to educate. We can't let people become indifferent and apathetic. But I think that they respond positively to the right messages and getting to know Israel, the truth about Israel.
The U.S. is currently in the throes of a very heated presidential election. How can the American Jewish community make sure that Israel remains a bipartisan issue and doesn't get turned into a political football?
Well, if you look at congressional votes on Israel-related issues, more than 90%, sometimes 100% vote for it. There's no other issue that gets that kind of a vote, not motherhood, not apple pie, nothing except Israel. So it is a unifying issue. And yes, you're right. We have to make sure that I want them competing. I want each side to show and prove their credentials and demonstrate their affinity for Israel. I don't want them pandering, but I do want them to express in serious ways their views on the key issues about the importance of the relationship and underpinnings of the relationship. And I think that that is the case today. So I believe it's bipartisan. I believe it's multi-partisan. I think people, liberals, conservatives, left, right, it's weaker in some places, stronger in others, but we are now trying to address it, and especially amongst the younger generation, to assure that future affinity.
The press has highlighted the potential or the growing rift, it seems, between President Barack Obama and Prime Minister Netanyahu. You work with a broad spectrum of American Jewish organizations. How can you make sure that you reconcile support for Israel with support for the U.S. government?
There's absolutely no contradiction. I think it's exaggerated sometimes, the tension. Certainly the personal chemistry between leaders is important. I think that in the beginning there were mistakes made on the American side and sometimes on the Israeli side, but that I don't think that characterizes it today to the same degree. I think that there is more trust, and we see that the United States and Israel have come to understand that Iran, the turmoil in the region, the problems that we face, Syria, these are issues that bring the United States and Israel together, that the interests are the same. And frankly, Israel is important to the United States in this, and the United States obviously is very important to Israel and to the region. So it's important for us as a community to help bridge any misunderstandings, to put things into the proper context, and to try to get the media to stop trying to exploit either imaginary or sometimes real tensions without putting into the context of the overwhelming good and commonality of interests that exist.
You mentioned the commonalities between the U.S. administration and Israel in terms of combating the Iranian nuclear threat, but there does seem to be a difference in approach in terms of red lines. If Israel decides that it's time for a strike, do you believe that they'll inform the U.S. government?
I think this is a matter for the generals and for much higher levels than myself. I always tell leaders both in America and in Israel, don't tell me anything I don't need to know. I don't want to know. I want to know what it is that we can do and how we can help. And I think the problem here is one of education. It's really getting people to understand the seriousness of the threat Iran poses to both countries and to the world, to the region. Frankly, many Arab leaders tell us that it's a greater danger to them than it is to Israel because Israel can defend itself and they can't. I think that it's important for us to highlight the human rights record, to understand how vicious this regime is, the real nature of this regime, so they understand what it would mean if they would have a nuclear weapon. So that whatever the outcome is, and whatever decisions are made by any of the parties, that people are prepared, understand the importance and the significance of making sure that Iran does not have the capacity to build a nuclear weapon.
Malcolm, thank you so much for your time, and we hope you enjoy the conference.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Good to talk to you.